Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today with me I'm joined from Chris from Liege of Games, where we're going to be talking about 10 games that took advantage of your FOMO. Chris, tell people where they can find you, what your channel's all about, all that kind of thing.
Chris, Liege of Games on YouTube. I do a little bit of everything. A little bit of crowdfunding, a little bit of retail, a little bit of ranting and rambling on the board game scene as a whole. So a little bit of everything, just whatever crosses my mind and what I like talking about. That's what comes out sometimes, good and bad and everything else in between.
Now, Chris, I've been watching Chris since, I think, 200 subscribers in general. Chris, anyone out there, if you're trying to start a channel, I remember just basically seeing one day you posting on Facebook, hey, I want to start a channel and, like, be talking about Kickstarters like these other channels are. And then you just went at it day after day. You just did what you needed to do. And you're like, where are you now sub-wise? Like, you're doing fairly well. You have you have a decent audience.
Yeah, no, I have a really consistent audience right now. I think I'm just under about 7,800 subscribers right now, and just good amount of participation and engagement. So it's been really good. It's been really interesting as well along the way. So
yeah, to me the thing that sticks out is just that dedication of you knew exactly what you wanted, you pursued it, and here you are. But with that, today we're talking about 10 games each, I should say, 20 games, enjoy the timestamps, jump around, but 10 games that are taking advantage of your FOMO in one shape or another. Now, I don't know about you, Chris, but for myself, my criteria was effectively games that I feel that the amount of content and what they're trying to do, or how much content they're trying to showcase, show you, all that stuff, is just way too much. And that was my criteria almost. Like, where do I feel a game could have stopped a long time ago and just didn't? What was your criteria?
Very similar, but also very different. I hear exactly what you're saying with way too much stuff, sometimes just overwhelmingly, but also stuff that really tugged on my, well, again, I guess this is actually completely accidental, stuff that tugged on my heartstrings that I said, man, I just can't not get it too. Like, despite knowing that maybe I had too much or that I didn't need half of what I was getting, that sort of aspect that I looked at and I said, I just also can't miss out on for whatever reason, good, bad, or otherwise, as you'll see with this list. So, yeah.
So I guess speaking of which, let's go ahead and start it off. If you want to start off with your number 10.
Sure. Number 10 for me, it was one of my first forays, actually, into Awakened Realms, and it was Etherfields. And it was one of those games, and I am a big proponent of one-wave shipping. So I'm always one of the late people getting it, and that was true with Etherfields. I got the 2.0 version, and I went all in. I got all of the gameplay content, and I played through the base game, and I was just like, man, one of my first, or one of my largest just letdowns for me personally, it just didn't click. As I said when I did my review of it, there were elements in there that I was like, wow, this is really good. But the sum of the parts, for me, just didn't equal what I wanted out of it. And for me, that was one of those ones where I stayed away from it prior to all of the other reviews and the wave ones and all of the comments about, like, the issues with the board and things like that. And I just said, okay, I'm going to go into it blank slate and kind of see. And I have a whole bunch of stuff for it. So I'm really excited. And it was one of those that I dove deeper into than I found myself all of a sudden kind of wading through it, and not in the best way in that sense. So that was kind of just a letdown in a way from that way as well.
Have you explored past the core box?
No, I have not.
No. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's so fascinating. It's a whole different conversation here about how much content there is. And some of the things I'm going to talk about later in this video are things that actually do explore the content. But there are times, I like going all in. I'm very much an all-in person. And there are times when I sit there and point to it, that's the reason I go all in. And then the other 7 out of 10 times, I'm like, I never needed all this. The core box would have been plenty.
That's very true. That's very, very true. Yeah. Absolutely.
My number 10...
A few of my other ones are going to be exactly that same way.
My number 10, coincidentally enough, is also an Awakened Realms title. This time, Nemesis. Nemesis Retaliation. Now, for many of these games that we're going to go through today, there are games that I'm personally pulled in by. Many of these are games that I'm not necessarily as much. And Nemesis is a title that I both have had incredibly good experiences with and also mediocre experiences. And for me, Nemesis, the first time I played Nemesis, it was I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, this is why this game is ranked number 17 on BG. I understood completely why. And then subsequent plays were hit and miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. It was very group dependent. And I've actually found that I find myself in a minority there. I kind of I'm more into the co-op camp as opposed to the semi-co-op. I like playing at the full co-op as opposed to like wondering who's going to betray me at any moment. But at this point, Nemesis from Awakening Realms, they have Nemesis Lockdown, and they have Nemesis Retaliation. For people jumping in on this campaign, which this campaign is going to be launching, I think, third quarter 2023 or whatnot, launching over on GameFound. And disclaimer, by the way, I do work for GameFound for anyone viewing, although I'm also putting this title on my list here. But it feels like this is going to be $1,000 all in, if not more, before you even get into pre-painted. And that's going to be like, it's just a lot of Nemesis content. There's no one who needs that much Nemesis content, although I am curious what differences they bring to the table. Like, I know Lockdown has been a win for some people and a miss for others in terms of whether it's an improvement on the original game or not. And I'm very curious what Retaliation is going to do. Despite myself, I'm a little excited for it. I've heard people say that this one's focusing more on the combat. I have not looked into it myself at all. And if it is focusing more on the combat, then maybe a hybrid of what Nemesis is with a little bit more actual shooting and trying to win. Could go either way, but this is definitely a game that they're taking advantage of the fact that it is, and not necessarily in a bad way, but many of these games are going to be companies that they have something that there's an audience for that people want, and they're like, well, we'll make more of it because people want more of it. And this game's ranked number 17 and is loved by many, and so this is my number 10, Nemesis Retaliation from Awakening Realms.
Very solid. I know exactly what you're saying. Nemesis, again, it's a very interesting split when you talk about games like that with even just one iteration, because you'll end up with the brass games on the other side of things, on the more heavy Euro, where people are very divided. Nemesis Lockdown, Lancashire, Birmingham, just, who, what, and it doesn't always fit for everybody. So, yeah.
What's your number 9?
Number 9, this is the only one that's not, at least in part, in my collection here at this point, and this is Primal: The Awakening from Reggie Games. I looked at this, and this was one of my, I want to say, last all-ins, speaking of your familiarity with that. This was one of those ones where I actually enjoyed the campaign because I like, actually, campaigns that just kind of go, here you go, here's everything we're putting out there up front, and this is the price point. And I know there was a lot of complaining about that originally, with the price point being, around $300 before shipping, and just saying, okay, again, do you need all of these monsters? Do you need all of this? Is it going to give you enough variety with creature after creature after creature? And even people at the time were looking over their shoulder going, this was prior to Steamforge Games' launch of Monster Hunter, and so they were already sort of apples to oranges. Is it going to be better? How is it going to compare? Do you go with the one in hand? Do you wait for the other one? And I just said, you know what? This is presenting me with something that I want. And it was definitely FOMO, because I still look at it and I still have the wonderings of, are all of these monsters, like we said before, like there's too much content at the beginning of the video, that comment. Are all of these going to actually provide me with significantly different gameplay from that aspect, where I can justify it in the sense of, okay, one, I really, really like it, which again is still a big unknown at this point as something that hasn't had hands-on play.
Have you played on
and will it be variety enough? Because, sometimes with mechanics like this, the rinse and repeat, the grind, and the video game side of things that always gets mentioned, is that going to be good enough for me from that aspect as well? Is it going to be too much? Where is that line going to fall? And that's the one that kind of got me, and I said, hooked me in, hook, line, and sinker, and I went for it. So we'll see, be determined.
So have you had a chance to play this one on TTS?
I haven't. I've watched other people play it. I've read through everything that's out there. I've looked at it, but me and Tabletop Simulator, it's the same way that I sort of feel like at times when I'm reading an article, a journal article online, or just anything along those lines, I like a printed copy. And so for me personally, what I see on there and how it translates sometimes to the table or the dynamics of the people that I'm playing it with, it's just not always the same, and how you get the feel for that. I've had that happen with a couple games where I've done those aspects and then tried to translate it in person, and just something is missing. Something is just lost there. As good as the game should be cerebrally, or as much as you think you should like it, it just doesn't always compute for me. So I'm trepidatious a little anxious, but I'm still very in the lines of hopium, if you will, sniffing
Gotcha.
that.
So I had a chance to play two of these monsters. I can tell you that the two monsters I played felt very different. Whether or not they can hold it up across the rest of them, no idea. That I'll let you know when it arrives, or you'll let me know when it arrives.
Yes.
Yeah. My number 9 is a game that is this is Pandemic, the Pandemic system, where I went through this game. When I first walked into this list, I kind of walked in with the expectation that most of what I talked about was going to be Kickstarter games. And as we go through this over here, some are, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are retail games as I went through them, and Pandemic in particular. And I ranked mine in order from least to most of how offensive I think, not offensive, how much content there was and how much they're trying to take advantage of things. But in the case of Pandemic has like 30, 40 games out there in their Pandemic system. This is a game that they came out with Pandemic. It was a worldwide hit. It spread like a pandemic, and it's one that it was then had offshoots and expansions, and Pandemic Legacy became the #1 game of all time. And since then, since Asmodee purchased it, it's basically been like every single possible variation: Pandemic Hot Zone, North America, this, that, Wrath of the Lich King. It's everything. It's absolutely what do we have? One of the most recent ones. They have Star Wars, Pandemic Star Wars, the Clone Wars. It's every single IP or theme you can possibly put onto Pandemic exists because they found a system that is well loved, and they sat there and said, how can we continue to make a system that people will buy into? And for the first 5 or 6 Pandemics, I bought them all. I tried them all. I kept some, didn't keep others, and then it's gotten to a point where I'm like, I don't think I need every single version of Pandemic ever. Not when you're going to be leveraging to the extent that they have so far. And to give credit, they make good games, and it's not just slapping on an IP with like whatever. They do adjust the system around whatever they're trying to do, and there have been better and worse versions of them. But overall, as much as I love Pandemic, and particularly I like Pandemic Legacy, this is definitely an IP that they are very much taking advantage of the FOMO.
Oh, for sure. I actually didn't get in on Pandemic at all for the longest time, and I did a ton of research before I ever got my first Pandemic about what one I was going to like and where that went. And so until I just got the recent release Star Wars one that's sitting back over there, the only one that I had ever had in my collection was Pandemic Iberia, which is still my preferred,
one of the betters.
As controversial as that is, that's my #1 of all the Pandemics. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, the Pandemic Iberia, I think that is one of the better and more sought after ones. It might be the one that's in the top 100, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's right around there. Just sitting just border, like teens or something right now.
What's your number 8?
Number 8. Again, surprisingly, again, I thought this was going to be, like you said, a lot of crowdfunding. And then I went through things and I said, actually, when I was making this list, number 8 wasn't on here at all as Marvel Champions. But when I was looking behind me and around me as I was getting ready, I was like, oh, you have a lot of that. How often do you get that played? Because, I mean, it takes the model that FFG has put out there with their Lord of the Rings, with the Arkham Horror, and now they're just putting sort of, like you said, with the Pandemic, you're getting a different IP slapped on there with some differences. But as I know myself, I'm prone to certain IPs in general, Star Wars being one of them, Marvel being another, for better and for worse. And so as much as I hear all the time people are oversaturated with that, a couple years ago it was zombies. I mean, for me, it's the Marvel aspect. And more recently even, because I'm not a big Avengers person. I never was big Avengers. I was always, growing up the 90s X-Men animated show. I mean, that was my love, Saturday morning cartoons, right? And so when Marvel Champions just came out with the X-Wing wave that they're doing right now, way too much of that has ended up in my collection. And I am also not a pre-order person whatsoever. And so I rarely pre-order. Rarely order from retail in general. I try and trade for most of my stuff at retail. But I have ended up with already a significant, almost, complete portion of the X-Men side of things, and a good, well too much portion of the Marvel Champions side of things. Again, not because I'm playing it a ton. I'd like to say that I am, but I mean, it's getting played once or twice a year right now, which is way unfortunate. But it just is FOMOing because I look at it and I just love the concept of it. But the actuality of it for me is not as good a fit, so it's playing a little bit of FOMO on me in that sense in a slightly different way, more from, again, tugging the heartstrings of my nostalgia rather than just the other aspects like we see more on crowdfunding. And again, like I said, another iteration, like you just mentioned with Pandemic, of a system that FFG has crafted and honed. And I mean, that's what everyone is waiting for, is just a Star Wars version of it next, in the same sense. So, speaking of FOMO,
Star
right
Wars
there.
Unlimited. Yep.
Oh, TCGs. Speaking of a whole nother video and conversation, right?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you put this on here because Marvel Champions was actually one of the first items I put on the list, and I did strike it off at the end only because of a technicality. Because I was like, if it's an LCG model, I don't know if it's taking advantage of the FOMO. I think the entire model is the FOMO. I mean, I think it's inherent to the model, so I wasn't sure if it like really counted, and I was going to include it as like an extra count. But since you have it, I don't need to, so that works.
Boom.
But yeah,
Almost like we planned it.
my number 7 is going to be Aeon's End, a different deck builder entirely. And Aeon's End is one that just, again, the sheer amounts of content that have been put out over here. I mean, this is one where, one of the things I did for a lot of these things is I scroll through this over here. If you click on BGG and you go to the game Aeon's End over here and you click on the family and you just see how many things are in that family, we have 28 items within the Aeon's End family, and that doesn't even include, I think my lowest was Nemesis. Nemesis was my first pick with 21.
Oh, you cut out.
Audio went out again. One sec.
Oh, and I think you said number 7. Was this number 8?
Number 8. It is number 8. You are correct. Good call. Number 8. But yeah, so over here, there's 28 items within the family over here, and that's not even counting the fact that it's been re-implemented by, oh my gosh, by the new version. What is it called again? Astronauts, perfect, thank you. And so they have a ton of content. They have expansion after expansion. They have legacy. They have Astronauts. They're really they're really leaning into the fact that there's an audience for Aeon's End, and they want to tap into that audience. And again, with 28 items before you get to Astronauts, and I'm sure more content coming out, this is definitely one that it took a good game system and is trying to see how far it can go.
And that's spoilers. That's going to be elsewhere on my list as well, actually. But yeah, I mean, I actually just got their latest Kickstarter a couple weeks ago in the mail. I haven't even opened it up because I feel like the same way. Like, I opened it up, or sorry, I did open it up, but I looked at, just cracked the rule book, and I said, I'm really concerned about like just creep, just overall creep into that with the legacy of Gravehold, of stuff that was good, but it didn't also port over nearly as well to some of the older stuff, and it just felt like some of the older stuff was obsolete. Like you said, they took the system, it's a very good system, love it, love deck building, but it's just starting to creep. And now I think, like you mentioned, Astronauts coming out, it's almost like a resetting in a different way with a very similar system that they know has been proven to work in the first place.
Yep, 100% agreed. What's your number 7?
Number 7, very similar in the same sense. Going back to the crowdfunding, though, for me, Arcadia quests, plural, because speaking of looking up all of the various iterations, the expansions, the numerous little add-ons or individual figures that came with Arcadia Quest, especially when you start to look back before CMON did the time machine and before they opened some of their vaults to allow some of those things out. This was, I think, my second crowdfunding campaign ever. The first one was an unnoticeable little card game that no one would recognize anywhere by the name of Villages, but this was the first one that I ever did as a crowdfunding that was just, completely eye-opening in terms of, holy cow, I'm going to spend $150 on getting everything for the first Arcadia Quest, which, surprisingly, yeah, I'm one of those people that still has the Guildmaster box of the exclusives, which is like the super sought after, but I got all of Inferno. I got almost all of Starcadia Quest. Starcadia Quest for me was when I jumped off the train. It just didn't click as well. Several of the smaller iterations between Inferno and Arcadia Quest with like the pets and a little bit of the riders. The riders really, yeah, you know where I was going with that.
Riders should have been where things ended.
Jumped the shark there for me.
Yeah.
And I got FOMO'd in because, again, my Star Wars nostalgia with the tie-in from that IP, it got me. And so...
The little ATST Walker, it was adorable.
I know. And just all the little glib tie-ins with the characters and the wink, nod, nods. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't not do it. But that was the one that I also said I don't need all of the expansions on, thankfully, as well. but that's one that I got rid of in addition. And the Arcadia quests, I'm sort of on the edge with a good portion of them even right now in saying the overhead, the can I get it to the table, those aspects of things more so more recently, it's fallen definitely by the wayside comparatively also just as my tastes have changed.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be upset with offloading a significant portion of that, as much as that pains me to say originally, as having it be one of my, again, probably favorite games the first couple years I was in the hobby and after I got it in the first place. So.
Yeah, completely makes sense. I mean, this is one where I believe, if I recall correctly, I was fully backing Star Arcadia Quest almost to the end, and I don't know, the last week of the campaign, I was like, that's it, I'm backing at $1. I'm jumping off. It's definitely one that, there's a lot of, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of games that I'm still vulnerable to, but this is one where I was able to hold off just enough and back out of the entire system myself. Yeah.
Very understandable.
My number 7, I think this time, actually,
7, yes.
is another A, which is, this time, is Alhambra. Alhambra, which is actually rated an exact 7, coincidentally enough. But Alhambra over here is another one that, if you look at the family, there's like 40 games in the system, and Queen Games in particular is fascinating, because if you want to talk about blaming on the FOMO, Queen Games, as much as I like their games, their business model is put out 17 versions of different iterations. So you have the family box, you have the big box, you have the designer's box, the mega family box, the designer's big box, the acrylic family mega box, the amount of titles they have for their big boxes.
First edition box, and then also the second.
Yeah, the Alhambra is their worst offender in this category. I mean, even Marrakesh by now, they're starting to lean into 4 or 5 different titles, where it actually almost makes it easier to just completely avoid what they have, because of, if at a certain point I can't have it all, I'm not going to have 7 versions of the same game, it makes it easier to walk away. But Alhambra is a great game. You should not skip on this. You can try it in BGA, you can get it in real life. It's a good game. I really recommend it. I just don't know if I recommend having 17 versions of it.
Any thoughts on the newer iteration that Queen Games put out, the Red Palace? That was the one, as somebody who doesn't have a copy, that was the one that I was looking at.
I mean, from a FOMO stance, yes, I want it. But it goes back to that, how many versions of it, like, I remember seeing that, I remember wanting it, and I was like, I don't need to back it. I mean, Alhambra works as is, so like, they're just trying to sell Alhambra another way, which is great. I mean, listen, if it works, it works.
Yep, true.
What's your number 6?
The business. Number 6, more recent on the crowdfunding with its recent second campaign, Guards of Atlantis 2. You know, this one, a little bit divisive in some senses. I mean, this is a game that when I reviewed it, I was flat out saying, this is not a game for everybody, right? This is not a game for many people. If you're looking for a lane battling, multiplayer online battling, just style game in general, with the big caveat there of meta repeated play and lots of characters that you're going to have to learn, this is for you at the higher player count. But with the latest GameFound campaign, they put out even more characters. I mean, this is like you see games online like League of Legends, where people say, okay, you go in there and you don't play, you know, a dozen different characters. You play 2 or 3 are your mains. And so this game sort of exemplifies that, and it sort of played on it in the same way. I mean, again, I love it. It's never going to leave my collection. At the same time, it's going to get very sparse play just by the nature of who and how and when it's going to fit those parameters. At the same time, because of my love for it in general, it's my blind spot. A game I'm just very passionate about that I feel like I can't have enough of, even though up here, I know with the base game alone, by far and away, an amazing value. I couldn't believe actually on the second campaign that they sold the base game. I think it was getting marked up on the secondary market for like $200 when it was in between the campaigns, but they were selling it for like $75. The expansions, as with most campaigns, as you know, like that's where the bigger markup is, that's where the bigger profit margin is, and with the new stuff, especially as a returning backer, I was getting not nearly the bang for my buck as the base game, and I said, oh well. You know, it got me. It just got me. I couldn't resist. I don't need it. I haven't played half of the expansion ones, or majority of the expansion ones, still going through the base game at this point. I may not get any time soon, even before this campaign delivers, but I still just could not avoid it from that aspect at the same time.
Yeah, this is a tough one too, because again, like yourself, I recommend the game very highly, but it's one of those where, I mean, the base game only has 6 heroes, so that's not a ton. But if you get the base game and 2 hero packs, that's likely more than most people will need or play. But sure, you might be missing the other 3 hero packs, and maybe this hero's in there that you want. But they're not cheap. And so it's really one of those games that definitely, I recommend it, I like it, I don't think you need all of it. My number 6 is Marvel United Multiverse, or specifically Marvel United in general, because we're 3 campaigns deep right now, and unfortunately that's not even the part that scares me. The part that scares me is when they do Campaign 4, and Campaign 5, and Campaign 6, or Harry Potter United, or Star Wars United, or DC United, or any of those things. I'm probably going to be there for a decent amount of them. I may be able to hold off on Star Wars United, but I'm saying that without seeing the miniatures they put out. And I don't know what they have planned, just in case someone's wondering, like, what are they doing? They haven't said a thing. But, I mean, I imagine they like money. They're working with Spin Master in this, who has done a lot of IP stuff. And it's not even their fault. Like this whole thing is taking advantage of the FOMO, blaming the FOMO. People want this game. People want more of it. I'm the idiot who's going to keep backing it because I want more of it. And sure, they keep making tweaks. They added equipment. They have some incredible miniatures. They keep adding the cool acrylic effects or whatnot. They have this Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. They make it appealing, and they definitely make you feel rewarded for jumping into this. But rewarded or not, this is definitely blaming it on the FOMO.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I'll give you my full thoughts when we hit this one on my list, because, I mean, this is very much you and I both, in that sense, being idiots about this, because I have way too much of it as well. Like you said, I mean, what other IP is going to tug as much? That's the question. I give them a lot of kudos at the same time, because, with some of the other Marvel Cinematic Universe, they really dug deep in terms of the characters, not only just in multiverse, but even with the previous X-Men, and I give them a lot of kudos for that. And so if you reference off of your Star Wars or your DC and you dig just as deep there, I mean, yeah, right, that's going to be incredibly tough to avoid in the future, regardless of how much I know I shouldn't.
They know I don't need this much. I've spent far more on this system than it deserves to have spent on it, but it is a system I enjoy, and to its credit, I have played a lot of Marvel United, so at least it has that going for it.
Absolutely. Agree there.
What's your number 5?
Number 5, right behind me, Cthulhu Death May Die. Speaking of CMON, like you said, putting out more of a good thing. And from all appearances, with the additions, with the exclamation points that they're putting on the new system of Cthulhu Death May Die, right? It's a more accessible, easier overhead, just quick dice chucking. They're not really dungeon crawl-esque, but it gives you that vibe without having all of the other things that prevent those things from hitting the table more regularly, at least for me. And so, I have all of the stuff from the first one. And I looked at the second one, and I almost sold all of my stuff from the first one, because I said, why am I getting all the new stuff for the second one? Again, speaking of just getting way too much of a system that I don't need, I love the compatibility. I love the mix and match of the old ones and the minions and just everything in between. And the fact that I can explain this much quicker than any of my other favorite dungeon crawl scenario-based games that are similar. It sucked me in as an idiot who spent way too much money on this. Why I wanted to, even during the campaign for the second edition, but season 3 and 4, why I was almost tempted to sell it to cover it, because I looked at that sort of like you sort of alluded to with Marvel United, where the second and third iterations were, let's be frank, superior versions than the first time around. And so I can't help but feel that it's going to echo that very much with seasons 3 and 4. Take what they've learned, put the exclamation points on it, and just make it everything a little bit better, of a really, really well thought of product, which, to be frank, is probably my second favorite CMON game out there, secondary to the one we were just talking about in the first place.
Yeah. No, this is, I love Cthulhu Death May Die. This is one of the few games I mentioned earlier that this is one of those, the 20% that make me not regret going all in, because I've played nearly all this content, and it's my second favorite game of all time, and every time I play it, it's a blast. And this is one where, as much as, don't get me wrong, it may well be taking advantage of the FOMO, but I'll probably end up getting whatever they put out with this, although I am grateful that they have spaced this one out as opposed to putting things out every year.
And that was a surprise, too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this is also a sleeper hit for them. This wasn't necessarily one of their best campaigns, but this is one that has crawled up in the rankings. It is continuing to crawl. It's broken through the top 100. I think it's broken through the top 100 by now, if I'm not mistaken, or it's getting close. It's one of their better games, and the rankings just over time. Some of their games fade from like from view, so to speak. You have them popping up on Rising Sun. They slowly drop down a little bit. This is one that has just had a slow burn upwards across the BGG rankings.
This is one of those ones that I go, in theory, this shouldn't be as fun as it is. Like, on paper, it doesn't look that way. But when you actually play it, it exceeds my expectations every time.
Yeah, it's a great game. Absolutely great game. My number 5, I think I can never keep track. My number 5 or 4, whatever, up to 5 is going to be Terraforming Mars. This is one that This is Terraforming Mars. It's Terraforming Mars. They came out. It's a great game. And honestly, it's a great game that I highly recommend. And I recommend getting Terraforming Mars and then the Prelude and maybe the big box if you want the deluxification. And that's kind of it. The other expansions, of which there are a lot, in my opinion, don't add a ton to the experience. They add a lot of card management, and they don't make the experience significantly better. I do like aspects of them, but I won't recommend them every single time. And they know this, which is why they finally announced Prelude 2. After saying they're not having any more expansions for it, they're like, hey, we're having more Prelude, because why not? You'll buy it, won't you? Yeah, and the answer is yes.
One that everyone says, right? I mean, the routine recommendation across the board. So let's get more of that into people's hands.
Yeah, 100%. It's a game that does. It's the go-to expansion. So it really is such an interesting point. Like, I'm really only now, as we talk about more, realizing like they didn't say it's a new expansion with some other name. They literally called it Prelude 2. Prelude 2. Can you tell me any time in history where they've had a board game expansion where they named the expansion the same name 2? It's not Terraforming Mars 2, it's Prelude 2. They're literally capitalizing on the one expansion that everyone and their mother recommends by calling it. Tell me, is there any other game that's like that where they literally have the expansion as a sequel name to the expansion? I'm not familiar with any, but yeah, it's.
I mean, they're not banking on creativity getting them the dollars, I guess. I mean, is what it means, right?
Well, creativity wouldn't work as much. Now, every time someone says get Prelude, people are going to buy 2 expansions instead of 1.
There you go.
Yeah.
Personally speaking, I'm Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, not the base game. But I mean, again, that's probably a whole different conversation there as well. So.
I mean, it lends itself to the whole conversation around. I mean, they have Terraforming Mars, they have Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, they have Terraforming Mars the dice game. They definitely have that. Yeah.
In that aspect, yeah, very true, very true.
Yep. And to you, what's your number 4?
Number 4, huge fan of this company, and you'll understand why in a couple more minutes. But number 4 for me is Millennium Blades. Millennium Blades, this is the preeminent experience for someone like myself who, as we were chatting about earlier, the TCG, the LCG model, who has never succumbed to the Magic the Gathering side of things. The temptation is there. I see the allure, the pack chasing. I did some of that when I was a kid with the old Star Wars Decipher game, like that style of things. But I never got into anything really beyond that. And so to mimic that feeling, that dopamine rush, right? Millennium Blades takes that, stuffs it in a huge box with way too many expansions, way too much mixing and matching, way too much teardown and setup, and it gives me that delightful experience that half of my friends hate in the first place, as capturing all of those magical pack chasing, deck building, and then tournament playing all in one session. And I think it was 3 different campaigns, and I could not resist any of them. I mean, the base game alone is way too much to get through in any short time. It's one of those games where you don't see 3/4 of the cards that are out there even in one session. And to be fair, it probably goes way too long for what it is. At the same time, I could not find myself not getting it because of that tie-in. Also, again, growing up, the nostalgia with like the Yu-Gi-Oh side of things as well, that this plays very heavily off of, that we just, my friends and I dabbled in just a tiny, tiny bit. But again, as someone, pre-stream, you go home and you watch that show, and again, it just triggered all of those things. And so I spent way too much money on it. It's one of my least played games that will never leave my collection. And I feel bad at the same time. It mimics or is mimicked by nothing else out there whatsoever, even with all of the new Magic the Gathering-esque, or even one versus one dueling style games where you're pre-constructed or you're deck constructing. There's just nothing else out there that gives me the same vibe. And so I kind of feel justified in that sense that nothing else has come close to replacing it, but I know I have way too much in the first place as well.
I've heard so much about this game, and it constantly intrigues me, but it's one that someone's going to need to teach me at some point, because I'm not diving into it otherwise. Yep.
Yep.
My number 4 is Dominion. Another heavy card-based game, of which is not my last one either, but Dominion, if I recall correctly, has something like 53 expansions, 53 items in the Dominion universe, and they also went with a whole entire second edition as well to boot. And Dominion is a game that I constantly bring up the fact that like 6 or 7 expansions in, they're like, you know what, we're done with Dominion, the world's seen enough, we are good to go. And then they're like, but we can keep selling it. And they kept coming out with expansions again and again. And then they rebooted the entire series into the second edition. You can buy upgrade packs if you want, so they do give you that option. Or you can just buy entirely new second edition of everything. Exactly. There's so much stuff for Dominion, and it's a game that I love, genuinely. And it's a game that I don't even mind. This is kind of, to me, like Marvel United in the sense that it's so easy to plug and play that it's not like an expansion I'll never get to. It's just another card pack, pull it in, do what I need to do with it. I do like the system, I do recommend the system, and I'm a huge fan of the system, but it's definitely one where they're like, if people are gonna keep buying it, I guess we'll put more stuff out, which they've continued to do 53 Dominion items in.
No, right? Like, very reluctantly, I guess we'll get some more money for our business to help keep, the lights on and things running. So, yeah, I mean, it's the grandfather of the deck building aspects in that sense. So, I have nothing bad to say about it. It's definitely not my one of choice, if you gave me the choice. But like you said, right? It's an enjoyable experience. If people brought it, I would totally play it at any time.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. Huge fan. Your number 3.
I mean, you've already covered it in part. Aeon's End. I mean, again, as a huge deck building fan, as someone who owns almost everything except for, scattering promos here and there, I am not a promo person at all. That's my one saving grace on a lot of these FOMO issues. If the sole incentive nowadays is just a promo pack, I can avoid it. But with Aeon's End, with the way they structured those campaigns even, you had situations where you get the game and there'd be a promo pack and an expansion and a promo pack and an expansion. And truth be told, it would be a little cheaper. It would be a little bit more available. And so it made a little bit more sense to bundle it. But as it's gone on, as we've seen Legacy 1, we've seen Legacy 2, we've seen Campaign 1, we've seen Campaign 2 now. And the powers have been creeped up. The keywords have creeped up. The complexity has all gone. It's jumped the shark a little bit for me. And that started really when I got into diving through last summer of Legacy of Gravehold. It was an enjoyable experience, but It was one that I also got to the point where I said, I don't need any more of this, which is always a strange feeling when you have something, like you said, with Terraforming Mars that you love, right? I love it, but enough is enough. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I've reached my point with, like I said earlier, about even the latest wave of the Kickstarter that's received and sitting in my kitchen right now to my wife's, chagrin, that I think I may end up getting rid of it before even trying to play it and see that, because I just feel so saturated by it with all that I have, especially not even, the mixing and the matching of how you can do it. Now, I don't know about you, I'm one of those people who just randomly grabs cards for the market and then randomly grabs a bad guy. So, that's a whole nother issue of complexity and difficulty there. But it's just fun in any way I play it. At the same time, again, too much of a good thing.
Yeah, totally get it. And we're going to continue going back to back with my number 3, going to be Legendary. Legendary over here, the Legendary system, which funnily enough has the exact same number of items as Dominion. Both of them have 53 items on BGG, which is funny because they're both like OG deck builders. But Legendary, unlike Dominion at least is a game that works to me. Legendary is a game system that I've played it, I've tried with expansions, I like it, but I'm not in love with it. I don't have the same affinity towards it. But again, it's another system that they continue to tap into. They continue to tap into every version of the thing you have. You have Marvel Legendary, you have James Bond Legendary, you have a Legendary Alien. There's so many different versions of Legendary, and within their core versions, they have tons and tons of expansions for it. This is a deck building system that, again, just said, hey, we're going to keep leaning into it. We have multiple, I think this is our third Marvel title in this video, where we're leaning heavily into cards, a little bit into miniatures, drop into Kickstarter, and a whole bunch of Marvel, all these things. But yeah, I mean, Marvel's got a rich history to pull from, and you combine that with a system that's going to continue to sell. And Legendary, I think, dominated the interest people had for a Marvel card game until Marvel Champions came along, at which point Legendary still sells, but now at least it's competition. But yeah, this is another system that 100% has been leaning into being willing to put out whatever there is because people will continue to buy it.
I mean, I give them a lot of kudos, just like with, United, in the sense that a lot of the newer stuff, too, they dive more into the lore and the comic books as, like, a comic book peripheral junkie in that sense. I really appreciate it. At the same time, like you said, I like it. I'm not in love with it. The semi-co-op nature of it originally that people just kind of toss out, because it kind of makes it unfun of whether or not you actually even end up winning in general. It's a game, though, that I have, a small collection of because it fits sometimes my kids' needs right now from that aspect. So it's something I own. It's something that rarely hits the table, though, because, again, they're starting to go in other directions as well. So, again, I'm not in love with it either.
Yep, completely agree. What's your number 2?
Number 2, this is going to be actually a little bit of a departure from a lot of the other stuff on the list. Originally on crowdfunding, and this is where I was going earlier when I mentioned Millennium Blades, level 99, I love their stuff. I love Bullet, right? Bullet is one of my favorite games of all time. It's probably in the top 5 games for me of everything I've ever played right now. And yeah, I just absolutely love the real-time, the pulling from the bag, the meta, the asymmetric abilities that these individual heroine characters have. Again, there's nothing else out there like it, and it's very divisive. Half the people I play it with love the real-time, half people hate real-time. I mean, that's just the nature of real-time, I think, in general in the hobby.
100%.
But for me, I just cannot get enough, even though, each of these characters, you really have to play, again, just like with a lot of these games, especially level 99 puts out, you have to get a meta evolving sort of situation where you're playing this character, and the first time you see the patterns that this character plays, you aren't going to know exactly how you're going to be able to interact with the board as these pieces start to fill them up, or how you're going to be able to manipulate, or how this character manipulates them differently than the other characters. And you really need to play it 2 or 3 times with the same character. And they've put out Bullet Heart, which is the original one. Then there was Orange. Then there's Star. And they've put out 2, I think now, separate promo characters completely separately just on their website. And I have them all. And I primarily like playing, just like with Spirit Island, I like playing with 1 or 2 of them right now. And so it's essentially, I want to be a completionist in one of those few rare situations. But it's definitely a game where one of these 3, Bullet, Heart, Orange, or Star, probably actually not Orange. Orange is a smaller expansion now that I think about it. But Star or Heart, they're equivalent, and you don't need either of them. Gives you more than enough content. But with the meta, just like BattleCon, just like Exceed, just like those other ones, there's tons and tons of variety. But really, the core elements is just sticking with the meta. Yet I have too many of them in the first place.
Yeah, Level 99 has done a good job of getting games that work and just putting out tons of content for them. But like you said, BattleCon, Exceed, I mean, if you want to talk about Blame It on the FOMO, there's a whole lot of these games from them. That Bullet is a great one. It's a solid one, but I agree with you. I think character variety is important. There's a certain point at which you just don't necessarily feel it the same way. Yeah. My number 2 over here is going to be Kingdom Death Monster 1.5, or Kingdom Death Monster in general, with a whopping 100 items on their expansion list on BGG. There's like 100 unique items for it. It's absolutely insane. This is a game that, I mean, if you want to talk about taking advantage of the FOMO, I mean, this is like 6 years, 7 years overdue and has not delivered. Anyone who's complaining about their 2-year-old Kickstarter, Kingdom Death Monster fans have been waiting for a long time for things to show up. But this came out with the original game, came out with expansion after expansion, with packs and packs and every single thing. It has over 100 unique items in the Kingdom Death Monster family, which is just insane. The scope and scale of what this game is. This is a lifestyle game, and it's a lifestyle game that, again, when you wait 7 years for your content to come out, it's
still excited at the 7-year mark, right?
Yeah, and this isn't like, that favorite author of yours that you've been waiting 7 years to finish, because the difference is when you have your favorite author waiting for that, you didn't pay for the book. So at the very least, you're waiting 7 years, but you didn't pay for it. There's like a down payment on these games, and I don't know when things are coming, are coming on at your door. I don't know, but it's going to be a long time, and it's a lifestyle game, and a lifestyle game that definitely has a lot of content behind it.
You know, as you know, I was one of those people. Someone locally to me let me in on their pledge manager after the original crowdfunding campaign for 1.5, and I actually have a gambler's chest coming, and it's actually going to be delivered later this summer, actually. So we'll see. But frankly speaking, with some of the other more recent games in that aspect, that arena overall, I'm looking at my copy right now, and I'm looking at the Gambler's Chest, which is, actually bigger than the core game itself, and that's part of the big delay. I'm looking at it, and I'm going, I am no longer have any excitement for this, and I'm seriously looking at just turning around and getting rid of my Gambler's Chest because of those factors, just not because it's not going to be a good game, but because the excitement, why I want to get into it as the preeminent, like you said, lifestyle game in that sense, has just passed me by as well.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. What's your number one?
You already mentioned it. My number one is Marvel United. I love that game. It is, like you mentioned, I'm an idiot for it. I have a stack sitting behind the camera that's as high as or higher than my height of my 2-year-old right now. And I look at it and I go, why do I have that much? And why did I just upgrade my pledge in the pledge manager from normal pledge to the all-in? Because I got FOMO'd. Because I looked at some of those things. I love Age of Apocalypse. I love some of those comic book storylines. And I just couldn't not do it, as I mentioned earlier, about my background with the nostalgia and the comics and the animation from the 90s. And, like you said, this is probably my most played game of the last 2 years running. With my kids, this is one that they just think is awesome. The little chibi miniatures, the card play, it's easy enough for my 6, now 7, and 9-year-olds to play. It is more difficult if you actually want to make it more difficult, so it's applicable sometimes to my game group that I play with. If we're looking for something light and not too serious, you can scale it. You can pick your poison, good guys and bad guys, that people always love if they have any familiarity with it. At the same time, there's just so much stuff. Like, you need a core box and one stretch goal box, and that's it. And yet, Here we go. I have all of it coming from the third one. And like you said, I would be hard tempted to avoid it even in the future, even if they did something completely non-Marvel, just with the aspect of knowing the system now in the first place and all the other factors that make me love it in the first place as well, of saying, oh geez, could I actually avoid that? I don't think I could.
I mean, we all could, but like, do we want to? Is the real question.
That's very true. That's better wording.
It's so easy. It's such plug and play. Like, I mean, I there is a point where it'll become too much, but right now, like, I have a good storage system. And by storage system, I mean my miniatures all dumped in a box, and I'm okay with that. And it's easy to pull them out and table. I don't know. I mean, I hope they don't make more, but we'll see.
I've found what I've done better, and I hate doing this, but I play the stuff I really like. And I did the all-in from X-Men, and I just sold the expansions that just didn't click with me.
Have you played Days of Future Past?
What?
Have you played Days of Future Past?
Yes, I kept Days of Future Past.
It's so good. It's my favorite expansion.
I kept it, but I did not keep all the other ones. Didn't keep Deadpool.
That's fair.
Trying to get rid of, or okay with getting rid of First Class. It's a few of those I'm just not as big a fan of.
Yeah,
especially from the first campaign. I got rid of almost everything that wasn't Infinity Gauntlet and Sinister Six from the first campaign.
I'm looking forward to Sinister Six being mixed in with the new stuff. The new Sinister Six and Multiverse. And that's the thing. They keep putting out stuff that looks appealing. It looks intriguing. We'll see.
And not.
Either way, my number one is I think we're like at what? How many command campaigns over here? And my number one is going to be Zombicide. Zombicide has 230 unique items under the BGG family. If you go to 230 unique items, sure, that's a lot of promo packs, a lot of expansions, a lot of things. This is a game that keeps on coming out with more content. And again, people do want it. People keep asking for more. They want more Black Plague. They want more themes, more everything. They continue to put out more. They just announced Monty Python Zombicide characters, which is like, I'm happy that that exists for somebody. It's not necessarily for me, but there's so much Zombicide content out there, and I own like 3 or 4 Zombicides. I own the Black Plague. I own Undead or Alive. I own Marvel Zombies. I backed White Death, although I'm gonna mentally bundle it under, you know, Black Plague just to justify to myself that I only own 3 Zombicides, because that's a normal amount of it. Again, 230 items. I thought King Death Monster was insane with 100 plus items under the family. 230 is absolutely insane. But this is the thing that made Command famous, and they continue to tap into it. And listen, it's one of those things that, again, as much as there are people who are upset about it, there are people who are constantly happy with what they're getting it. But they're going to keep selling it. The same reason they're going to keep selling Marvel United. They're going to keep selling something that continues to have an audience. Part of what annoys me is Marvel United is all one system, so I kind of want it all. But the Zombicide, like, I get them knowing I'll get rid of some, keep others, and it'll all work out. It's a system I like, but it's a system that definitely, when you think of FOMO, when you think of people taking advantage of the FOMO, this is definitely under that system.
What always surprises me with that one is, even now, with something like Black Plague, or what, Black Horde, Green Plague, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Color word combination,
White
right?
Death.
They're going with that. The thing that surprises me is I still see those ones sell for relatively well-held prices on the secondary market.
Yep.
Still now, years and years later, which, again, like you said earlier, with the thought about Cthulhu Death May Die of creeping up when some of the others are slinking down, those are still well thought of. And it's not necessarily like, okay, this version is just head and shoulders above, right? It's not just a better system that makes the other one outdated. There's just enough nuanced differences that people are still looking back, but still also going in and getting the new stuff too.
Agreed. Agree completely. It's a good system, but it's a system, again, lots of content, but people who want it. Yep. But either way, these are our 20 games. I think we had, what, 2 crossovers? We had Marvel United, we had Aeon's End. Anything else?
Aeon's End?
I think it was just those 2, right?
Yes,
so
just those 2.
18 unique games for you, 2 crossovers, and a whole lot of stuff. The big surprise for me was how much card-based content showed up here and how much retail-based content, because I thought it was going to be like 95% miniatures and Kickstarter, and it very much was not on my end.
That's what we associate it with, though, right? I mean, that's where everyone says FOMO, and everyone jumps to the little picture of the Kickstarter exclusive green logo in their head when that gets said. So, yeah.
Very much so. Well, Chris, thanks for joining us. Everyone, I'll have a link down below to Chris's channel. Make sure to check it out. But these are 18 games, or 20 games, that are definitely taking advantage of your FOMO.